So it goes as something like this. You wake up in the morning and you tell yourself, I'm going to do really well today. I'm going to double down on my efforts. I'm going to really do this. And during the day, you probably do. You push through the hunger. You push through all the decision making. You push through the tiredness. And somehow you hold it together throughout the day. And you tell yourself, I'll deal with that later. But by evening, something shifts. Suddenly, the idea of cooking a proper meal doesn't sound too thrilling. It feels exhausting. You don't want another task. You just want relief. And that's the moment when the snacks, the chocolates, the takeaways, the biscuits or whatever start calling your name. That is the emotional pattern. This makes sense. By 9 p.m, most people aren't struggling because they suddenly lost all willpower or they're suddenly weak in some way. They're exhausted, basically. You're exhausted. Every time you decide what you're going to wear or how you're going to phrase that email or which route you're going to take home so you can complete a task of some, I don't know, you're trying to think about how you can manage without the car while it's booked in for its MOT, so you're trying to figure all this stuff out. You're using a hell of a lot of mental energy and effort to make all those decisions, and most people don't realise how much effort actually you're using, how much mental energy, emotional energy you're using just trying to get through the day. So by the time evening comes, 9 p.m. or whatever, your brain isn't suddenly thinking, oh God, do you know what? I could really use a lettuce leaf right now. Okay. It's not asking what is the healthiest thing that I can do right now. It's kind of asking what's easiest. What's the easiest thing right now? What is comforting? What is relief? What is going to give me a minute or two to switch off? The problem isn't that you don't know what to eat. The problem is that you're expecting yourself to make perfect decisions when you're mentally exhausted. So if you think about it, you tell yourself, don't you, I need to be stricter. I need to be more disciplined. I need to double down on my efforts. I need to be more motivated. Whatever, you tell yourself a whole bunch of stuff, and yet the same thing keeps happening. But if you think about it, food does a lot of things. It does a lot of jobs. It can be a reward. It can be comfort. It can be relief. It can be a pause. It can be that moment where the pressure finally comes off and you have a moment to breathe for a second. But most people already know that biscuits and going to the cupboard at 9 o'clock isn't the answer. That's not the issue. The issue is that by evening, food is doing a job. Like I say, it's comfort, it's relief, it's distraction. It's the one part of the day where you finally stop pushing, where you finally kind of go, the day is over. And when you start looking at it in that way, the whole pattern starts to make a little bit more sense. Because if food is the only thing helping you switch off, of course your brain is going to keep going back to that. That doesn't make you weak, it just makes you human. Okay, so what actually helps then? The first thing is not another diet, not more rules, not more dietary guidance, not more willpower, and certainly not trying to win the evening with discipline. Because if you spent all day making decisions, dealing with stress and trying to be good, by 9 p.m. you're often asking too much of yourself. So most people kind of say to themselves, God, I just need to be stricter, I need more willpower, I just need to be more disciplined, that's all I need to do. But if that was the answer, wouldn't it have worked by now? And that's the part that no one really kind of talks about. Every time it happens and you sort of fall off the wagon, so to speak, you kind of end up blaming yourself and you end up being critical. So you set yourself another plan, another set of rules, and you promise yourself this time it will work. But the evenings, really, they just continue to look the same, and you repeat the same pattern over and over again and feel more disheartened, start criticising yourself. And it's not because you're failing, but because you're trying to solve the wrong problem. The problem was never that you didn't know biscuits weren't a healthy choice, or that packet of crisps, or that tub of Ben and Jerry's, or whatever. It's not that you don't know it's healthy. That's not really the issue. The problem is that information and willpower are often at their weakest when you need them most. That's why so many intelligent, motivated people find themselves stuck in exactly the same cycle. So if you've been listening to this and thinking, God, that sounds exactly like me, I want you to know two things. First, you're not alone. There are a ton of people who struggle with this, and as a mental health dietitian, I've worked with many people who feel exactly the same way as you do. And actually, secondly, there is something you can start doing straight away, and that is stop measuring your evenings by how perfectly you've eaten, and actually start instead to ask yourself in the moment, before you start to grab something to eat, just check in with yourself and ask yourself, what am I actually needing right now? Am I feeling tired? Am I feeling lonely? Am I stressed? Am I looking for comfort? Because the moment you start pausing and asking yourself those questions, things actually really begin to change. It's because when you start getting really good at answering that question, you're actually deviating away from your normal behaviour, normal thought pattern, which is probably something along the lines of some self-criticism or beating yourself up, whereby you're kind of saying to yourself, oh God, I should be so much better at this. Why do I lack willpower? I'm so weak, and so on. But when you pause and make that conscious decision to stop and think in a space before you actually eat something, and give yourself that opportunity to answer that little question, what am I actually needing right now? It changes how you might speak to yourself. So you actually start practicing self-compassion, and you start being kind to yourself, because you're checking in with yourself and asking, do you know what? I don't have to beat myself up. I can actually think about what I'm actually needing, and in fact give yourself that opportunity to do that, and that it's okay to do that, and that's actually where real change starts to happen, because you start to understand your actions and your behaviours, and the fact that you're giving yourself a pause and being kind towards yourself and being self-compassionate is actually a change in itself. And it might seem like that's a really tiny change, but I promise you, these repeated tiny microscopic changes compound over time, and they start you onto a journey of more positive change and a kind of a happier place to be, really. If you'd like more help with this, I've actually put together a little tiny guide called Why You Can't Stick to It for People Who Are Good All Day and Lose It at Night. It walks you through some of these patterns in more detail, and it gives you some practical ways to break in the cycle. But starting off with that little question, that little pause, what am I actually needing right now in the moment? And as I say, even force yourself to answer that question and jot down some little comments. I promise you, you'll start to get some insight and some understanding into why you do what you do. So whether you decide to look at the guide or not, I hope that you do start to practice that little pause, and that I hope you've taken some value away from today's video, because you don't need more willpower. You need more understanding, because you're not weak, you don't lack willpower. You need, as I say, more understanding, and that just makes us human.